For years, Chad Hiltz welded in silence, smiled for the cameras, and built dream cars from literal junk. To him, it was never about what you had, it was about what you could make. His hands, hardened by decades of labor, transformed scraps of metal into rolling works of art. His mind, unconventional and fearless, turned limitations into creative fuel. But behind the roar of engines and the flash of chrome, something far darker was revving in the background. At 53, Chad, better known to millions as Bad Chad, finally admitted to something fans had only whispered about in online forums and comment sections. It wasn't about money, fame, or even the stress of being in the spotlight. What he confessed went deeper, more personal. And when the words came unfiltered and Roffins were left stunned, heartbroken, and even angry. "I'm forced to hide this," he said. But hide what, and why? What could push a man so bold, so unapologetically raw, to conceal something for decades? The truth has finally surfaced, and it changes everything we thought we knew about Bad Chad. Long before the world knew him as a TV star, Chad Hiltz was just another kid from Canning, Nova Scotia. No connections, no big-name sponsors, and certainly no fancy tools. Just grit, vision, and a burning desire to create. His early life wasn't easy. He dropped out of high school and stumbled through a rough youth that seemed to steer him toward a quiet, working-class life. But even then, beneath the surface, there was something extraordinary. He had a rare eye for possibility, an almost obsessive drive to create something out of nothing. While others saw rust, he saw a canvas. Where others saw junk, Chad saw potential. With little more than scrap metal and stubborn willpower, he began building jaw-dropping custom cars that defied convention. His builds weren't polished or traditional, they were raw, imaginative, and stitched together with materials most would dismiss as trash. That's what made them unforgettable. Chad's big break came with the launch of Bad Chad Customs on Discovery Channel. But unlike most automotive shows driven by massive budgets and pristine garages, Chad's world was something else entirely. Set in Hiltz Autoco, his modest shop in rural Nova Scotia, the show documented the chaos and magic of a man who built masterpieces on a shoestring. Alongside his tight-knit crew and his partner Jolene McIntyre, Chad tackled projects that looked impossible to most, but he made it work, again and again. When the show premiered in 2019, audiences were hooked. It wasn't just about the builds, it was about the man. Viewers didn't just see a mechanic, they saw a rebel, a rule breaker, a creator who refused to compromise. He welded license plates into fenders, turned airplane parts into spoilers, and made art from salvage. He wore ragged t-shirts, painted with spoons, and lived on instinct. He didn't try to be marketable or polished. He was just himself, and that authenticity made him a hero to countless fans. But being a folk hero comes at a price. As the legend of Bad Chad grew, so did the expectations. Fans projected onto him the myth of the self-made genius, the underdog who beat the odds without selling out. Chad didn't just build cars, he built a narrative, one that was empowering, but also unforgiving. Because in the eyes of his fans, Chad couldn't have a bad day. He couldn't show weakness, he couldn't change. He had to remain fearless, bold, creative, and raw all the time. The character of Bad Chad became larger than life, and Chad Hiltz had to keep up, no matter the cost. The pressure became relentless. Every new project had to be bolder. Every video had to be more intense. Every fan comment, message, or criticism had to be acknowledged or silently absorbed. Behind the scenes, the demands were crushing. Chad was still brilliant, still inspired, but he was also burning out. He was trying to live up to a version of himself that had become a myth. And myths aren't real. They don't get tired. They don't break. But Chad was breaking. The signs began: small, a missed post here, a shorter video there. Fans noticed that he seemed more distant, more irritable. The energy was still there, but it flickered. His once playful dynamic with Jolene started to feel less spontaneous. Social media posts hinted at something deeper, a burnout that couldn't be shaken with a few days off. At first, fans made excuses. Everyone burns out, they said. He's just tired. But soon whispers turned into rumors. Reddit threads dissected every frame of his videos. Comments accused him of being reckless, of cutting corners, of being more showman than craftsman. Some mocked his lack of formal training. Others tore into his personal life, questioning everything from his relationship to his intelligence. The criticism turned cruel. Hate mail began to pour in, not just petty insults, but brutal, personal attacks. Letters questioned his body, his past, his worth. Some included veiled threats. Chad started hiding them, first from Jolene, then from himself. A quiet pile of pain grew in a drawer somewhere, a physical reminder of the cost of fame. Through it all, he kept building. He told himself the work would save him, that if he pushed harder, if he welded longer, edited better, added more flair, it would all go away. But it didn't, because the thing he was hiding wasn't just exhaustion. It was a deep, gnawing truth. He was no longer okay, and he couldn't admit it. He believed that if he showed weakness, the myth would collapse. Fans would turn, they'd stop believing, so he wore the mask of Bad Chad tighter than ever. But behind the camera, he was unraveling. The anxiety before filming became paralyzing. The guilt of missed messages, the stress of looming deadlines, the fear of letting people down, it all weighed on him like a car he couldn't lift. His creativity dulled, his patience thinned, and his joy, once so evident in every hammer strike and every weld, began to fade. Eventually it became too much. At 53, something inside Chad shifted. Maybe it was the years of bottled stress finally boiling over. Maybe it was the realization that the myth he had built was slowly suffocating the man inside. Or maybe he just hit that point, the one where the pain of pretending outweighs the fear of truth. And so, he stopped hiding. He said the words no one expected. "I'm forced to hide this." And in that moment, the wall he had built of confidence, sarcasm, and relentless work began to crack. It wasn't a grand revelation or a dramatic breakdown. It was something quieter but far more powerful. The myth of Bad Chad was built on rebellion, grit, and defiance. But the man Chad Hiltz was built on something even stronger: honesty. And now, as he faces the truth of who he is and what it's cost him, fans must decide whether they love the myth or the man who dared to finally speak. The very thing Chad Hiltz loved most, building, had become haunted by doubt and pressure. Each car was no longer just a project, but a defense, a desperate attempt to prove the trolls wrong and keep the myth of Bad Chad alive. But a man can only wear a mask for so long. Eventually, he didn't just show cracks, he shattered. And when he did, fans were stunned not just by what he revealed, but by how long he had kept it buried. At 53, there was no dramatic build-up, no staged moment, just a quiet video posted online late one evening. Chad alone in his garage, finally ready to say what he had hidden for years. No tank tops, no wild gestures, no showman flair. He looked tired, older than usual, as though the weight of something long buried had finally worn him down. In that raw and unfiltered moment, Chad revealed a side of himself few had seen: vulnerable, emotionally spent, and honest. After decades of pushing forward with grit and bravado, Chad admitted he had been struggling in silence. The cause: a relentless stream of hate mail, criticism, and personal attacks that had accumulated over several years. It started small, an occasional nasty email after a new episode aired, but over time, the negativity grew louder and more vicious. What began as critique of his methods or car designs turned into cruel, deeply personal messages attacking his intelligence, character, and even his personal life. Chad developed a ritual to cope. He would print or write out the worst of these messages and lock them away in a drawer in his workshop. That drawer became a symbolic dumping ground for the pain he refused to share, not with fans, not with his team, not even with Jolene. The pressure to uphold the public image of Bad Chad, the fearless rebel who never let anything rattle him, and he couldn't afford to be honest about how much it hurt. He believed vulnerability would be seen as weakness, a betrayal of the persona fans had come to expect. So, he smiled, he built, and he hid everything else behind the camera. But the emotional toll didn't vanish just because he refused to acknowledge it. Anxiety crept into his creative process. Exhaustion began to show in his face. The joy he once found in turning rust into art was slowly replaced with a grinding sense of obligation. He wasn't just building cars anymore, he was building armor. The cost of that silence eventually became too great to bear. In that somber video, Chad peeled back the mask. He didn't dramatize it, he simply told the truth. For years he had been bombarded with negativity and chose to internalize it, believing the myth people expected from him was more important than his mental well-being. But what Chad revealed went beyond his personal struggles. It highlighted a larger issue: the invisible burden carried by public figures, especially those celebrated for their toughness. In a culture where vulnerability is often equated with failure, people like Chad are expected to be indestructible. And when they're not, they suffer in silence. Chad's decision to speak up didn't just shatter the myth of Bad Chad, it forced his audience to question their own expectations. There was no dramatic conclusion to the video, no tidy resolution, just a man choosing to stop hiding, even if it meant disappointing those who saw him as untouchable. In that moment, the man behind the legend stepped into full view, not flawless, not invincible, just real.